I've been flying cargo planes over the Yukon for 11 years, and I can tell you exactly what a dying engine sounds like. It sounds like a held breath that finally gives out. The left turbine started coughing somewhere over the Mackenzie Range, that jagged spine of rock that splits the Northwest Territories like a scar down the back of an old man's hand. November, 4:30 in the afternoon, which up here meant full dark. The kind of dark that isn't romantic or mysterious, it's just absolute. It sits on top of you like weight. My name is Declan Marsh. I'm 38 years old. I've got a scar above my left eyebrow from a loading dock incident in 2019, a bad habit of drinking coffee that's gone cold, and until that particular Tuesday, a perfect safety record. I had 14,000 pounds of industrial drilling equipment in the hold and nobody to call it in, to accept a dispatcher named Gerald who was probably asleep at his desk in Yellowknife. I radioed anyway, got static, tried again, got something that might have been Gerald or might have been the wind deciding to speak in broken syllables. The second engine let go at 9,000 feet. After that, it wasn't flying anymore. It was just a very organized form of falling. I know the protocols, I've run the simulations. But there's a significant difference between a simulation and the real moment when the instrument panel goes dark, and the only sound in the cockpit is the shriek of wind past the fuselage and your own breathing, which has gone very fast and very shallow without you giving it permission to do either of those things. I found the lake on radar before the radar died. A long, flat body of water cutting east to west through a valley between two ridgelines. I didn't know its name. I still don't, technically, not the name on any map. I know what the thing beneath it calls it, but that translation doesn't exist in any human language. I brought the nose up as much as I dared, killed the fuel lines to prevent a fire on impact. Prayed, and I'm not a man who prays often or well, but I managed something that I think counted in the general direction of whatever is listening. The ice hit. Or I hit the ice. Perspective depends on which one of us was moving, and at that point we both were. The plane broke apart in a way that was both violent and, strangely, quiet. The sound of impact was enormous, a crack that must have echoed off both ridgelines. But then the water came in and sound changes underwater. It becomes something low and intimate, like a voice speaking directly into the interior of your skull. I was in my harness. The cockpit section had separated from the hold and was sinking nose first, and the cold hit me like a wall being swung by something with very large arms. 14 degrees Fahrenheit, I found out later. The water temperature, not the air. The air was colder. I got the harness off. My hands were already starting to fail, fingers going from pain to numbness in about 40 seconds, which is actually faster than the survival guides tell you. I got the cockpit door open against the pressure, and I pulled myself out and up, and I broke the surface with maybe 30 seconds of functional movement left in my body. The ice edge was 6 feet away. I made it, I don't know how. There are things the body does in extremis that the mind doesn't supervise, and I think this was one of them. Some ancient part of my nervous system that predates conscious thought grabbed the ice, hauled my weight up, and rolled me onto the surface before the rest of me understood that was happening. I lay there on the ice in the dark. My plane was gone. The water had closed over it as if it had never existed. The cold settled in like something patient, like something that had been waiting for me specifically and was in no hurry now that I'd arrived. I thought, this is where I die. I wasn't panicking when I thought it. It was more like a logistical assessment. No shelter, no signaling equipment, that was all in the hold, which was somewhere below me in the dark water. No way to generate heat. Core temperature would drop below survival threshold in approximately 40 minutes in these conditions, and that estimate was generous. I started moving anyway, because the alternative was to stop moving, and something in me wasn't ready to authorize that. I crawled away from the water's edge. The ice was thick, old ice, not the dangerous new stuff, and it held my weight without complaint. I got to my feet. I looked around. The valley was silent and enormous and utterly indifferent to my existence. And then the light came from below. Not from above. Not from a rescue beacon or a distant truck or a star breaking through the cloud cover. From below the ice. It started as a faint blue-white diffuse like bioluminescence, the kind you see in deep ocean footage, cold light generated by creatures that have never seen the sun. But it brightened, it organized, it moved. Something very large was moving beneath the ice, and it was moving toward me. I should have run. I want to be clear about that. Every rational survival instinct I had was screaming at me to put distance between myself and whatever was rising toward the surface of that frozen lake in the middle of nowhere. I didn't run. I think part of it was the cold. My legs weren't entirely reliable anymore, and running would have been generous as a description of what I could manage. But part of it, if I'm honest, was something else. Something about the quality of that light. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't the white-hot urgency of a predator closing in. It was the particular glow of something that has been sleeping for a very long time and has just, finally, felt something worth waking up for. The ice surface in front of me began to change. I watched it happen. The ice didn't crack, it softened. A section perhaps 8 feet across, going from solid opacity to translucence to something like glass over the course of about 20 seconds. I could see down through it now, into the water, and the water was lit from below, and the light was coming from something that was large. Larger than I'd processed at first. What I'd taken for a diffuse glow was actually a single, coherent source, and the source was rising, and as it rose I could make out the shape of it. And the shape of it was not a fish or a whale or a geological feature or any of the reasonable explanations I'd been cycling through. The shape of it was a woman. A woman made of something that was not quite biology and not quite technology and was entirely, unmistakably both. She came through the ice the way water comes through your fingers, not breaking it, just passing through it. The surface closing behind her like a membrane sealing itself. She rose to her full height, perhaps 3 feet in front of me, and I looked up at her. And I did not move, and I did not speak, because there was nothing in my experience or my vocabulary that was adequate to what I was looking at. She was tall, 7 feet, maybe more, but proportioned with a kind of terrible elegance, the proportions of something that had been designed rather than evolved, and designed by an intelligence that had very specific ideas about what a form ought to look like. Her skin, if skin was even the right word, was the color of deep ice, not white, but that particular blue-gray you see in the heart of a glacier, where the ice has been compressed for centuries into something almost mineral, and it was luminous. The light I'd seen from below was coming from her, from inside her. From something beneath the surface of whatever she was made of, that generated cold light the way a living thing generates heat. Her hair, and again, hair is an approximation, was long and fell in what looked like liquid strands, each one carrying that same cold glow, pooling around her shoulders and moving very slightly, as if in a current that existed only around her. Her eyes were open. They were the first thing that looked at me with anything I recognized as intention. They were silver, not gray silver, like polished metal, like the surface of still water in moonlight. And they were looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as recognition. Not surprise, recognition. As if she had been expecting something, and I was it. And that fact was causing her to experience something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She looked down at me. I'm 6'1", and she had 5 or 6 inches on me, and she said something. It was not in any human language, but it had language's architecture, rhythm, pause, emphasis, the particular cadence of a sentence that ends with something that wants to be answered. The sound of it bypassed my ears somehow and registered directly in some older part of my brain, the part that understands intention rather than words, and what it registered as was. "You fell." I said yes. She blinked, one slow movement of those silver eyes. And then she did something that I was not prepared for, which was to reach out one long hand and place it against the side of my face. Her touch was not cold. That was the thing that broke through my shock more than anything else. I'd expected cold, I'd braced for cold, and instead what I felt was warmth. Not the warmth of human skin, which has a particular slightly sticky quality and radiates heat diffusely. This was a focused, deliberate warmth, like a temperature that had been specifically chosen and precisely applied. She held my face in her palm and looked at me, and I stood there on a frozen lake in the middle of the Yukon, while my core temperature dropped toward the incompatible with life threshold, and I looked back. The cold stopped hurting. I want to be medically precise about this. The cold didn't go away. The air was still -20, and my clothes were still soaked, and I was still in genuine mortal danger. But the pain of it stopped, like someone had reached into the nerve pathway between my body and my brain and introduced a pause. "Thank you," I said, because it was the only thing I had. She tilted her head. That gesture, the slight angle, the attention sharpening, I recognized as the universal body language of "say that again," and I realized that she was doing what I was doing. She was listening for the architecture beneath the words. She was trying to understand intention. She said something else, longer this time, with a falling cadence at the end. What it registered as was, "How did you get here?" I said my plane went down, both engines. I came down on the lake. She looked up then, away from me, up at the sky where my plane had been. And her expression changed, that same face, those same silver eyes, and what moved across it was something I recognized immediately, because I'd seen it on human faces in emergency rooms and accident sites, and the particular kind of phone calls that come in the middle of the night. It was concern, old, deep, instinctive concern, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it shows up. She looked back at me, and she made a decision. I could see it happening, the moment her expression settled from assessment into resolution. And then she moved, and I learned the second thing about her that I had not been prepared for, which was that she was very fast. Her arm came around my back, not grabbing but supporting, and the warmth that radiated from her contact point spread outward from my back across my torso and down into my legs, and the cold retreated further, and she was moving me, guiding me, steering me with a gentleness that was very deliberate, toward the center of the lake. I said, "I can't go back in the water." She paused, looked down at me again. And I watched her process what I'd said, not just the words but the physical information, the shaking that I was trying to control and not entirely succeeding at, the pallor of my hands, the particular stillness that hypothermia starts to impose on your thinking. She understood. I don't know how, but she understood. She changed direction. Part 2, beneath. She brought me to the shore. The valley had a tree line, spruce and fir packed dense against the lower slopes of the eastern ridge, and at the base of the ridge, where the trees thinned, there was an outcropping of rock. Not a cave exactly, more of an overhang, a shelf of granite that jutted out and created a shallow space beneath that blocked the wind. She settled me against the back of it, and then she did something that I watched with complete attention, because I didn't know what was happening, and I've always found it easier to focus on mechanics when everything else is incomprehensible. She placed both her hands flat against the stone floor of the overhang, and she was still for perhaps 10 seconds, and then the stone began to change temperature. Not glow, not melt, just warm. The way a stone warms in sunlight, except there was no sunlight and it happened in seconds rather than hours. The warmth came up through the rock and into my back and my legs, and I felt my core temperature begin, very slowly, to climb. She sat back, a fluid fold to the ground that had the quality of something boneless, something that didn't have the structural constraints that skeleton imposes on movement, and she watched me. I said, "You're not from here." She looked at me for a moment, and then she said something short and decisive. What it registered as was, "Neither are you." I actually laughed. It came out a little hysterical, which I think was the hypothermia talking, but it was genuine. She watched me laugh with an expression of grave attentiveness, like a scientist observing a new behavior, and I saw the corner of her mouth move just slightly, just the beginning of something that in a human face would have been the precursor to a smile. "Fair point," I said. The warmth was working. My shaking was subsiding toward the intermittent rather than the continuous, which is a good clinical sign. I became capable of more complex thought, which is both a blessing and a complication, because the more capable of thought I became, the more I had to reckon with the fact that I was sitting under a rock overhang in the subarctic dark, next to something that had come through the ice like it was tissue paper, and was now heating stone with her bare hands. "What are you?" I asked. And then immediately, "Sorry, that was rude. I don't mean I've never." She held up one hand. The gesture was unmistakable. Stop. And it had a particular quality to it, not impatient but thoughtful, like she was trying to formulate an answer in a medium she wasn't accustomed to using. She pointed to herself. Then she said a word, a single, short, precise sound that landed in that old part of my brain and registered as a name. Not a word meaning a species or a title or a category. A name. Her name. I tried to reproduce the sound. I failed. She watched my attempt with that same grave attention, and then she made it again, and again I failed. Fundamentally, the phonemes involved something my vocal tract didn't have the architecture to produce. We went through this 3 times, and by the 4th I'd accepted defeat, and she seemed to understand that too, because she tilted her head again in that way that meant asterisk problem solve, and then she pointed to me. "Declan," I said, "my name is Declan." She repeated it, almost perfect on the first try. The sound of my name in her voice was the most disorienting experience of my life, familiar syllables in an utterly alien resonance, like hearing a song you know played on an instrument that has no business being able to produce music. "Declan," she said again, and this time it didn't sound like repetition. It sounded like she was deciding to use it, like naming is a transaction and she just completed her half. I pointed at her. She understood immediately. She made the sound of her name again, and then she paused, and she said something longer, and what it registered as was, "You can call me something else, something your mouth can manage." "Can I pick?" I said. She waited. I thought about it. Outside, the wind had picked up. The temperature was dropping further toward the kind of numbers that exist as facts rather than experiences, because the human body can't experience them long enough to form a memory. But here under the overhang the stone was warm, and her light was low and steady, and I was alive in a way I had not expected to be. "Lyra," I said, because she glowed like something cold and astronomical, and because the name felt like it had the right architecture, 2 syllables, a vowel that opens up in the middle. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lyra." Not testing it, accepting it. "That's you," I said. "That is me," she said. I blinked, because that had been English, accented in a way that had no precedent in any accent I'd ever heard, the vowels slightly too precise, the consonants carrying a harmonic undertone that English doesn't have, but English. Recognizable, syntactically correct English. You just. "I have been listening," she said, "to your language for some time." "How long?" She considered. "The first of your kind I heard was approximately 200 of your years ago, a man, moving across the ice above me on some form of sled. He was speaking to his dogs. He was saying," she paused, and her expression did something complex. "He was saying that they were very good, that he was proud of them. I stared at her. I like the language, she said. I have been collecting it for 200 years. It is a short time, she said, and she said it without condescension, genuinely, as a statement of fact from a perspective I didn't have access to yet. I have been here for much longer than that. How much longer? She looked out at the dark valley and the frozen lake, and her expression went somewhere distant. Somewhere the scale of what she was contemplating required a kind of stillness that only very old things have. Long, she said finally. Long enough that the mountain above us was different when I arrived. Long enough that the lake was warmer. Long enough that the creatures who lived in this valley then do not live anywhere anymore. I did the math on that, and my brain delivered a number with a lot of zeros in it, and then quietly declined to fully process the implications. Are you alone? I asked. She looked back at me. Something moved in those silver eyes, old pain, the kind that has been held so long it's become structural, part of how a thing is built rather than something being done to it. Yes, she said, for a very long time. I didn't say I'm sorry because it felt inadequate by several orders of magnitude. Instead I said, what happened? She was quiet for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, we came here, my people, because this world was being catalogued, studied. We were researchers, explorers of a kind. We documented worlds. Scientists, I said. A useful simplification. The faint ghost of that almost smile again. We studied the life here. It was very early, very simple life, but promising. There were arguments among my people about how long to stay. Some wanted to move on. The galaxy is very large and there is always more to see. But you stayed. I stayed. I had found something. A system of communication in one of the larger organisms, an early form of what you would now call collective intelligence. It was the most remarkable thing I had ever encountered. I could not leave it. What happened to the others? They left. They said they would return. That was, she paused, and the mathematics of what came next was somewhere in her expression. That was not 200 years ago. I let that sit for a moment. And the organism you were studying? Gone, she said. Long gone, extinction events. The planet changed many times while I waited. I went into dormancy. I would wake, observe, determine that there was nothing yet that required my attention, return to dormancy. The lake formed above me. I thought it was a good shelter. The ice was, she paused and looked up, toward where the ice was. I thought of it as a covering, a blanket of sorts. Until I fell through it. Until you fell, she agreed. And there was something in her voice when she said it, a quality of specific attention, of something having registered as significant, that made the back of my neck do something that I don't have a precise medical term for. Your impact, she said, woke me, not just the sound. The shock wave through the water. I have slept through many things. I have slept through storms and seismic events and the sounds of your aircraft passing overhead for the last century. But the signature of something alive in distress entering the water above me. She stopped. I do not know how to explain this precisely in your language, she said. But there is a difference between the world making noise and something calling out. I felt you calling out, even though you were not doing so intentionally. And another pause, and this one had the quality of someone examining their own reaction with something like surprise. I could not stay below. I looked at her. She was looking at her own hands, where the light that lived inside her pulsed very slowly, like a heartbeat. You saved my life, I said. You were falling, she said. I could not. She stopped again. When she looked up at me, her expression was doing several things at once, and one of them was something I recognized with the part of me that has been a human person for 38 years, the part that knows what it looks like when someone is surprised by the strength of their own feeling. I could not allow you to be lost, she said. That is the simplest way I can say it. The wind outside increased to a howl and then declined again. The stone under me was warm. Her light was steady. "Lyra," I said. She looked at me. "Thank you," I said, "not just for the warmth, for waking up." She was still for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand over mine. Her hand was larger than mine, the proportions slightly different, the warmth of it precise and deliberate, and she said nothing. But what was in her expression was something that 200 years of collecting a language couldn't quite cover, something older than words. Part 3, First Light. I slept at some point. I didn't intend to. You learn early in northern flying not to sleep outside in winter, because sleep is how the cold finishes what it started. But the warmth from the stone and the exhaustion of surviving catastrophic hull failure combined into something my body couldn't negotiate with, and I went under. When I woke, the sky through the gap in the overhang was gray, the gray of very early morning, the light that precedes light, and Lyra was seated across from me, her knees drawn up, watching the sky with an expression of absolute attention. I watched her for a moment before she noticed I was awake. There was something in her posture that I found difficult to name, a quality of waiting that wasn't passive, like standing at the edge of something and being ready to step. "Morning," I said. She looked at me. "You slept." "I did. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Your core temperature is higher than it was," she said. "Matter of fact, clinical. The sleep was appropriate." I sat up. My clothes had dried. I didn't ask how. "How long until they come looking for me?" "They," she said, and then, "Your people, your rescue systems." "Search and rescue. When a cargo flight goes down, they start looking within a few hours. But this valley," I looked out at the ridgelines, "this is remote. And if the wreckage went under the ice, the radar signature will be confused. They might not have a precise location." "Days," she said, "not a question." "Could be days," I agreed. She seemed to weigh this. "Then you are not afraid." "I'm working very hard not to be afraid," I said honestly. "It's an active effort." Something in her expression shifted towards something that might have been appreciation. "Your people," she said slowly, "are more interesting than I expected." "You expected something." "I have been observing you for 200 years, she said. "From below, sound and vibration and the electromagnetic signatures that your technology generates, I have built models, expectations. And the models were," she paused, looking for the word, "insufficient, too small. They captured behaviors but not," her hand moved, a gesture that encompassed something she couldn't reduce to syllables, "not the texture of it. The way you keep going when the rational assessment is to stop." "That's just stubbornness," I said. "I know the word," she said. "I do not think it is sufficient either." I looked at her profile against the growing gray light. The cold luminescence that came from within her was less visible now that the sky was brightening. It didn't diminish exactly, but it became something you'd see only if you were looking for it, like stars at dawn. "What's it like," I asked, "being that old?" She was quiet for a while. Outside, a bird called a raven, I thought, that particular carrying caw, and she turned toward the sound with an expression that was entirely unguarded for a moment. Genuine delight. The kind of delight you can only feel about something you've been paying close attention to for a very long time. "The raven," she said, "it has changed less than almost anything. In the time I have been here, the raven has changed almost not at all." She paused. "There is something reassuring about that." "You like ravens." "I like that they persist," she said, "that some things persist." "Is that what you've been doing, persisting?" She looked at me then, and the look had an angle to it, an assessment that made me understand I'd stumbled into something real without entirely meaning to. "For a long time," she said, "I told myself I was waiting, that my people would return, that what I was doing had a purpose beyond." She stopped. "Beyond being afraid to leave." "Afraid of what?" Of having waited so long for nothing. A pause. If I leave before they come back, then perhaps they come back and find nothing. If I stay, then at least there is the possibility. The waiting itself becomes a form of hope, even when hope is no longer the rational description of it. I thought about this. I thought about 11 years flying cargo over terrain that would kill you without hesitation, and about how routine it is to be the only living thing for hundreds of miles, and about how a person builds a relationship with isolation that is complicated. I understand that, I said. She looked at me with those silver eyes, and I think she believed me. Declan, she said. She'd been testing the name at intervals, feeling how it sat. This time it had a quality of decision to it, like she'd committed to it entirely. Tell me something about your world that I cannot know from sound and vibration and electromagnetic signature. I thought about it seriously, because the question deserved a serious answer. Okay, I said. The smell of coffee in the morning, specifically cold coffee that someone made hours ago and forgot about, and then you find it and you don't care that it's cold because you want the coffee, and there's something about that moment, the mug warming your hands even though the coffee is cold, that is, I don't know. It's an ordinary thing, but it's yours. She was listening with her entire body. That quality of attention she had, nothing about it was casual. She brought her whole self to whatever she focused on. The comfort of ordinary things, she said slowly. Yes, exactly. I have observed the concept, she said. From below, the sound of your aircraft, the same routes, the same schedules. There is a rhythm to it that I found, she searched. Comforting is perhaps too strong, but I watched for it. When the sound came at the expected time, there was something that resolved. That's it, I said. That's exactly it. She was quiet again, and the quality of her quiet had changed from earlier. It had less isolation in it. I want to ask you something, I said. You don't have to answer. She waited. When I fell, I said, when the impact woke you. You said there was a difference between the world making noise and something calling out. You said you felt me calling out. I stopped. What did it feel like? She turned away from me and looked at the lake, and the early light on the ice made it look like hammered silver. Necessary, she said finally. It felt like something necessary. Like there is a concept in my language, I do not have a precise English equivalent. It is the recognition of something that has been missing, occurring at the precise moment of its arrival. I sat with that for a while. We have a word, I said. It's Greek originally. The word is anagnorisis. It means the moment of discovery. The moment when the thing you didn't know you were looking for suddenly arrives, and you recognize it. She repeated the word carefully, anagnorisis. Yes, I said. Yes, she said. And she was looking at me when she said it, and there was something in her expression that was new, something open in a way I hadn't seen since she first rose through the ice and looked at me across the frozen surface with that expression of recognition. Part 4, the second night. They didn't come on the first day. I'd expected it, but knowing something is going to happen and experiencing it are different things. The sky stayed gray and silent, and no helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, and by mid-afternoon, I'd accepted that I was spending a second night in the valley. Lyra spent the day with me, not performing caretaking, nothing that could be read as obligatory. She simply didn't leave, and her presence had settled into something that felt entirely natural, which was its own form of disorientation when I stopped to think about it. She answered questions. I had a lot of questions, and she had, I came to understand, a significant amount of genuine enthusiasm for having someone to answer them. 200 years of observation and nobody to tell what you'd noticed. She told me about the glacial period, not as a historical event, but as something she'd watched in real time. The ice advancing and retreating over the valley in cycles she described with the ease of someone who'd watched a season change. She told me about a mastodon she'd observed at close range through the ice, a young male, separated from his group, and the particular quality of its confusion that she'd found affecting. "You feel things," I said. She considered the observation without defensiveness. "Yes," she said. "We were designed to be careful with the things we study, to observe without interfering. But observing for long enough," she paused, "it is difficult to not have feelings about things you have watched carefully." "Is that why you stayed? Not just the waiting for your people, because you'd gotten attached?" "To the valley," she said carefully. "To the raven, to the rhythm of seasons, to the sound of your aircraft. To things that were here." "Yes. And now?" She looked at me. She'd been doing that with increasing frequency, looking at me as if checking something, measuring something, comparing what she found against something internal. "Now there is something here that can look back," she said. I held her gaze. Her eyes in the afternoon light were extraordinary, not just the color, which was shifting slightly as the light changed, picking up a warmer undertone, but the depth of attention in them. The feeling of being looked at by something that was seeing you entirely. "What do you see?" I asked. "A man," she said, "who fell from the sky," a pause, "who does not want to stop." "I never have," I said. "I don't know if that's courage or just—" "I know what it is," she said, and her voice had that quality of certainty that I'd come to recognize, the certainty of someone who has been watching carefully for a very long time. "You said stubbornness. I said insufficient. What I observe is something that does not require permission to continue, not from circumstances, not from odds, not even from itself." I thought about the 40 seconds in the water, hauling myself onto the ice. I thought about 11 years of empty sky. "It gets lonely," I said, "whatever it is." "Yes," she said quietly, "I know." The second night was warmer than the first. She'd extended the warming radius of the stone, and by the time dark fell the overhang was something I could describe, in the rough direction of accuracy, as comfortable. She'd also done something to the lake. I hadn't asked about the mechanism, partly because I suspected the answer would require a physics vocabulary I didn't have, that discouraged wind from moving down the valley toward us. We talked until very late. She told me about her world, her home world, the one she'd left so long ago that she had difficulty describing what it looked like without relying on analogies that were themselves inexact. A world with 3 suns, which meant night was a rarity rather than a constant. A culture that had organized itself around exploration in the way human cultures sometimes organize themselves around religion, as the central defining purpose that shapes everything else. "Do you miss it?" I asked. She considered the question with her usual precision. "I miss the idea of it," she said. "The thing I actually remember and miss is a place that no longer exists, even if the planet still does. 200 years changes a world, a civilization. The people I miss are gone. Even if there are people there, they are not the people I knew." "That's grief," I said. "Yes," she said it without flinching. "I arrived at that understanding some time ago. It is easier to carry once you name it correctly. You know, that's something people spend years in therapy trying to understand." "Your therapy," she said thoughtfully. "I have heard conversations from below that I believe were therapeutic in nature, the particular rhythms of that kind of speech, one person speaking more, the other person reflecting, long silences that had purpose. You picked that up through the ice." "There was a wilderness camp to the north," she said, "for many years. They brought people there who were in difficulty. I learned a great deal about human grief from what I heard." She paused. I found it humbling. How openly your people can speak their pain when the conditions allow." "My people were," she paused, "more contained." "Contained how?" "We believed that examining one's internal states too directly was indulgent, that what mattered was function, what you could do, what you contributed." I looked at her. "That sounds exhausting." Something happened in her expression, a quiet fracture, small, precise. in something that had been held in position for a very long time. Yes, she said, it was. And now, I asked, out here with nobody around, did you ever? I learned from the ravens, she said, and from the people at the wilderness camp. I learned that speaking aloud to nothing is not nothing. That the act of putting a thing into language does something to it, makes it smaller, or at least makes it a shape you can hold. What did you talk to? The ice, she said, the valley, eventually your aircraft passing overhead. I knew they could not hear me, but I spoke to them anyway. I told them what I had seen, what I was thinking. A pause. I think I was practicing for something I did not know was coming. I looked at her for a long time. Lyra, I said, I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hold it in whatever way makes sense for someone with your perspective. Okay. She waited. You are the most extraordinary thing I have ever encountered in my life, I said. And I fly cargo planes over the Arctic, so the bar was already fairly high. She looked at me with those silver eyes, and the light inside her did something I hadn't seen it do before. It brightened. Very slightly. The warm light undertone that emerged when the day's ambient light hit it at the right angle, it intensified. You are, she said carefully, unlike anything in my models. Is that good or bad? It is, she paused, and her expression moved through several things. It is the most interesting thing that has happened in a very long time. Part 5, the third morning. The helicopter came from the southeast, just after 9 in the morning on the third day. I heard it before I could see it. That distinctive thrum, I know that sound the way I know my own heartbeat. Search and rescue, military-grade rotors moving a search grid. I was already on my feet. I looked at Lyra. She was standing at the lake's edge, facing the direction the helicopter would come from. Her expression was composed in a way that was very deliberately composed, the kind of stillness that is a structure built over something that is not still at all. They'll see us, I said, if they have thermal imaging. Yes, she said. Lyra. You must go, she said. It was not a command. It was a statement of simple fact, offered without dramatics, and that was somehow worse than dramatics would have been. I know, I said, but... You are functional, she said. You can direct them to your wreckage. Your people will want to know that you survived and how, and they will be concerned about the ice. They will have questions. I'll manage the questions. Yes, she said, you will. The helicopter came over the southern ridge, and I saw the sun catch the rotors, and I pulled off my jacket and waved it. The standard signal. The universal human language of I am here. I am alive. I need you. The helicopter banked toward me. I turned back to Lyra. She was looking at me with an expression that had stopped being careful. The composure she'd built so deliberately had developed an honesty in it that made the careful architecture visible. I could see both the structure and what it was protecting, simultaneously. I will find a way to come back, I said. I want you to know that. It's not a comfortable thing to promise because I genuinely don't know how, but I... Declan, she said. I don't want you to be alone down there again without... Declan, she said again, and this time she stepped forward and placed both hands on either side of my face, the same gesture as the first night, and looked at me from very close range with those silver eyes that had been paying careful attention to the world for longer than my species had been writing things down. I know, she said, I believe you. I don't break promises, I said. I know that too, she said. I have been listening to you for 3 days. I have a reasonably complete model of you now. And there it was, the smile, not the precursor. The thing itself. You are, as you said, stubborn. Yes, I am. The helicopter was close enough that I could see the markings now. Search and rescue, NWT division. Good people. They'd have medical on board. Go, she said. She dropped her hands but didn't step back. Come back when you can. I will be here. You've been saying that for 200 years, I said. Yes, she said, but now it means something different. She stepped back. I looked at her one more time, the cold light of her, the silver attention of those eyes, the 3 days of conversation that had reorganized something in my understanding of what the universe contained. I walked toward the helicopter. Part 6, Return. The questions I managed. I told the search and rescue team that I'd found shelter in the rock overhang, which was true. I told them I'd used the warmth of the stone to maintain core temperature, which was also true, in the way that technically accurate statements can contain significant omissions. When the doctor at the Yellowknife Hospital looked at my vital signs and told me she couldn't explain how someone who'd been in that water at that temperature for that long had sustained so little damage, I told her I'd been lucky. Also true. The investigation into the crash was routine, engine failure, no foul play paperwork. Gerald at the dispatch desk felt terrible and made me coffee twice on the first day back, which I drank cold both times and didn't mind at all. I was back in the valley 6 weeks later. I'd spent those 6 weeks doing the thing that any person with a logistical problem does, making a plan. The valley had a geographic designation in the Territorial Survey database, though it had no common name. It was accessible by small plane to a strip of flat ground 2 valleys east, and then by snowmobile across the ridge. 8 hours from Yellowknife under good conditions. I'd told no one. I'd spent time with this decision and arrived at a conviction. Lyra's existence was hers to decide what to do with. I was not going to be the person who brought the apparatus of human scientific and governmental interest down on her without her consent. She had been alone for a very long time, and the last thing she needed was a committee. I came in low over the ridge, the snowmobile loaded with supplies, including, specifically, a thermos of coffee, because I'd had a thought about that, and I came down to the lake's edge, and I stood there in the late afternoon light and I waited. It took 3 minutes. The ice changed. That same softening, that same translucence, and then she came through it, and the sight of her hit me in the chest in a way that I recognized immediately and didn't try to rationalize. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You came back," she said. "I told you," I said. She stepped forward across the ice with that fluid, boneless grace, and when she reached me, she looked down at me, and her expression had the quality of something that has been waiting, not with resignation, the way she described the old waiting, but with something that expects the thing it's waiting for. "I brought something," I said. I held up the thermos. She looked at it. "Coffee." "Cold coffee," I said. "The specific kind I told you about, hours old. Cold despite the thermos. I want you to try it." Something moved in her expression that was entirely new, something younger than the ancient patience she carried, something closer to the surface. "The ordinary thing," she said. "The ordinary thing," I confirmed. She took the thermos. She turned it in her hands, her enormous, elegant hands, feeling the weight and temperature of it with the same total attention she gave everything. Then she opened it, and she held it close, and she breathed in, just breathed, taking in the smell of it, and the light inside her brightened, the same way it had on the second night. "Tell me more," she said, "about the ordinary things." "I've got a list," I said. "How long a list?" "I've been working on it for 6 weeks," I said. "It's extensive." She looked at me with those silver eyes, and in them I could see something that 200 years of observation had never given her, and 3 days in a frozen valley had just begun. The specific brightness of someone who has found the thing they did not know they were waiting for. The thing the ancient word describes, anagnorisis, the moment of recognition, arriving precisely when it should. "Then stay," she said, "for as long as the list takes." I looked at the valley, the ice lake, the dark ridgelines, the sky going copper at the edges where the sun was thinking about setting, the raven somewhere in the spruce, calling to nobody in particular. "That's going to take a while," I said. "Good," she said. and the light that came from inside her lit the frozen air between us like something that had decided, after a very long time, that the dark was finished. Epilogue. I fly less cargo now. I fly myself mostly. Small planes, my own aircraft, the routes I choose. The Mackenzie Range in winter, when the sky gets big and the dark gets serious, and the stars come out so thick and close you understand viscerally that space is not empty. It is full, astonishingly full of things that have been there long before you arrived and will be there long after. Lyra has been teaching me her language. The phonemes I can't produce. She was right about that. My vocal architecture is insufficient, but the structure of it. The grammar. The way it organizes time differently than English does, with tenses that don't map cleanly onto past, present, future, because a language built by something that has been alive for geological time periods doesn't cut time the same way we do. I've been teaching her the ordinary things. The coffee, she can't drink it. The chemistry isn't right for her biology, but she likes the smell, and she holds the thermos sometimes the way I first saw her hold it, with that total attention. I've taught her about cold hands and warm mugs, about the specific satisfaction of a mechanical system that runs exactly as designed, about driving a long straight road in the early morning when no one else is on it, and the sky is doing something complicated at the horizon. She's been teaching me patience, not as a philosophy, she's not given to that kind of instruction, but by example, by the way she watches things. By the quality of attention she brings to the raven and the ice, and the sound of my snowmobile coming over the ridge, and the particular way the valley holds sound in cold weather. Her people haven't come back. We've talked about that several times, in the way you talk about a thing that needs to be spoken to stay at the right size. She holds it now without the old frozen quality, holds it as something true that doesn't have to mean what it used to mean. Because here is what I know, from 38 years of being a human person and several months of knowing her. The universe is not empty. It is full of things that have been waiting without knowing what for. And sometimes those things fall through frozen lakes and wake up what was sleeping beneath. And sometimes what was sleeping beneath comes up through the ice to meet what fell. And sometimes, if both of them are stubborn enough, what happens next is not a conclusion but a beginning. I brought her a raven feather last trip, found it at the tree line pristine, black as void. She holds it the way she holds the thermos, with the whole of her attention, with the light inside her lit. And, title, his plane crashed into a frozen lake beneath the ice, an alien queen awakened. Film seed. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, almost human 2020. Duration target, 60 minutes. Word count, ~9 800 words. Narrator, first-person human male Declan Marsh. Niche, HFY, Alien Queen Princess Romance.